So it's been about 2 weeks since I've done my first review of the 268 V4, and since then I've met the tank a ton of times in battle, and to be honest, I was super annoyed by this tank. This armor is hilariously strong, so I thought maybe I have to review my own review, so just get to a new conclusion about the tank maybe. That's what this video is about. So let's just do a very quick recap here of the first video, where I've talked about the 268 V4 compared to the 268 Tech Tree version and the JAG E100, and said this tank is something in between those two. But I think I might have missed out on that a little bit, as the playstyle of the V4 is very much unlikely any of those two tanks, although like the characteristics are something in between. The 268's name is a little bit misleading in that regard. But yeah, I would rather compare the 268 V4 to the E3 and the WZ113 GFT that we have in the game already. And those two tanks are just much more like it when it comes to the armor in front. And many people have said, like, the 268 V4 is so annoying, it is broken, it is OP. And they could not believe me when I said, like, this tank is balanced and it's actually just meh. I don't really like it. And I know a ton of people that have spent huge amounts of money and gambled on a lot of crates for getting the V4, yet struggled to get it and were quite disappointed about it. But I can tell you, maybe you should not be. Maybe you should not be. But you know, from games already, like, you have probably met WZ113 GFT on E3 in games already, and those tanks, once they are hull down, they are super damn strong, I can tell you. They don't have any real weak spots apart from a tiny cupola on top, which you're barely able to hit anyways. So in that regard, the V4 is actually just not as good as those two tanks, if they are hull down. That's a big if that we have to face here. If those tanks are hull down, the V4 is just worse than that, because it does have a cupola on top and the superstructure is really not that strong once it's slightly angled. In the open though, yeah, the V4 just performs way better, as it just has this insanely strong lower plate, while the lower plate of the E3 is a little bit weaker, and 113 GFT, of course, it is much weaker than that. It is much bigger also, much bigger, easier to penetrate. But yeah, once those tanks are hull down, they are stronger actually than the V4, and the V4 often struggles to go into hull down positions because it just has 5 degrees of gun depression, which is really not a lot. Let us just quickly have a look at the stats here and compare that. Like, the V4, like, DPM wise and everything, like, you can just take everything out of those stats and the other tanks are better. Like, that's very obvious here. On the comparison here, I also took in the 263, although it's a little bit different with the low alpha damage. Only the alpha damage of the V4 is relatively high for a TD, yet even the JAG E100 does have better stats in almost all regards. And yeah, just look at this. 30% better dispersion on all of the other TDs. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. And that is something that is really annoying me about the V4, that the gun is so freaking annoyingly inaccurate. But yeah, you've got to live with it, and you do have the armor to get close in theory, if you are able to get to face the enemies without them just ignoring you. But if we are just switching over to the HE, then you notice a huge difference here to the other TDs, and that is like the V4's HE is completely useless. I noticed this on the first games already. Also, the penetration is really quite weak, and yeah, the HE is just not great at all. All the other tanks have just mentionable higher HE damage, like just take out the 263 here, but all the other tanks have like 20, even JAG has 50% higher HE damage, but okay, that alpha is higher anyways on the AP already. The other two have lower alpha damage on the AP, but higher HE alpha damage. Disappointing. Also, you've got to keep in mind that high penetration tanks like other TDs really don't struggle with the armor of the V4, unlike the mediums and heavy tanks that you would play with rammer most likely. But does it even make sense to compare to those tanks? Or is there anything else about it that I maybe don't like about the V4 so far? Yeah, it can be said something, and that is TDs in general do have a huge problem at the moment, and is mostly because like since the heavy hit point buff, most of the mediums also have been buffed on the DPM accuracy whatsoever. TDs were basically left out, apart from the 263, which got a little bit of a buff, and yeah, 113 got special consumables as well as the E3. Yes, that can be said, but mostly TDs were just left behind as they just don't have the hit points anymore to be aggressive. And just talking about TDs in general, like they do have inaccurate guns, they don't have the best armor, and they just don't have really a lot of versatility. So mostly you're forced to play very passively. Otherwise, you're going to get out-traded by the enemies, even if they have lower alpha damage. But just because the enemies, if it's heavy tanks, they just have a more accurate gun and better armor mostly. So yeah, you are going to struggle with the TDs in the current meta. Also with the armor profile that TDs have, like they mostly have rear-mounted guns, and they do have obviously a lack of a turret, which means that you just have to awkwardly side scrape in front of the enemies or have to just peek out quite far in order to turn around your tank, which mostly offers your track wheel to the enemies and gives them a chance to perma-track you in the worst case if you only have one repair kit especially. And just, yeah, you just have to take a lot longer time to have the option to shoot the enemies. Because of this, there is this problem that you just, with a TD, you have to camp. And camping mostly is just highly ineffective because you can only punish the enemies once they are doing mistakes. But if the enemies don't do mistakes and it is your allies that are just pushing forwards and dying, then you cannot help out your teammates and you just have to take a long way until you reach the front and get to fight the enemies there. But mostly that is just too late then, and you have already lost the game. Being able to get aggressive is a huge benefit in this game, as it is really fast paced, and yeah, you just don't really have 30 seconds or 1 minute to stand around and not do anything while your teammates are dying or getting shot and putting shots out, which even if you win, you just get to not have a lot of damage. But is there maybe a better comparison? And I would say yes, absolutely. There is a 60TP out there, which is also just very new still and does have some really special consumables and very nice characteristics. And so let's have a look at this. The TP does have, compared to the V4, 10% or 11% less DPM, and you might say, yeah, that's speaking for the V4. But actually it is the case that the TP still has the tungsten shells available. And if you're using those, your damage output will be increased for 15%. So that means your alpha damage is the same. It is really 690 as well on the 60TP then, which is just the same as on the 268 V4. And also you've got a momentarily DPM of 2978, which is even above the V4s. Obviously that only counts for about 2 shots on the TP. So yeah, that is just half a minute roundabout, and you don't get to use the full DPM all the time. But still, like for most pushers, that is absolutely enough. Also, of course, there are other big heavy tanks in the game, like the E100 and the VK72, which just only lag behind closely. The alpha damage is comparable, but those tanks, like the heavy tanks with a big alpha damage, they just have a huge benefit over the V4, and that is their ability to just go a lot more aggressive. As they have a turret, they can just go into the fight and they can still look around and shoot their sides, go for a lot of snapshots here and there. They even have a more accurate gun, which is just hilarious, as those are heavy tanks and not TDs. But yeah, those heavies also. Another big benefit there is that those really have a lot more hit points and even stronger sides when it comes to the armor. Yeah, you might say VK, E100 don't have the strongest sides, but still you're able to side scrape or just peek out in a safer way and manage to put out a lot more damage or better trades in general. So I would say, like, honestly, there is not really a reason to play the V4 at the moment, although it is quite annoying to face sometimes. Yeah, but there is an E3 which is just way stronger once a tile down, does have more gun depression. There is a 60 TP which does the absolutely same thing as the V4 while having 750 hit points more, and does have a turret, is able to go in, does not even have a huge cupola as the V4, and the TP can just steamroll you, does have the tanks and shells, and just does not lag behind in any regard. So to me, the V4 really is not that special. It does have a niche, it does have its place in the overall like tech tree, although it is a premium or collector tank of course, but it does have its place. Yeah, but I won't play this tank too much anymore. That's already it. If you want some tips on how to increase your average damage, maybe check out my last video over there. And if you want to see my gameplay live and commented, then just join in on my Twitch streams. 3 times per week I'm streaming there, and have fun. Goodbye.